Hi, I'm Brian Parks from Belimo Technical Support. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the Belimo PR Actuator. I'd like to go over the two black caps that are on the top of the PR Actuator a little bit more in depth. Take this hand crank. You can take and unscrew this black cap here. This front one is for setting the switches. What you would do is then stick the hand crank in, follow the instructions, you would be able to set the end switches. When you're finished, it's very important that you put the cap back on. Under the cap here is a little O-ring. That O-ring is a part of maintaining the NEMA 4X rating of the actuator. You want to do is you want to tighten it back in snugly so that you want to make sure that the O-ring is making contact with the top of the actuator. This one over here, very similar. This particular hole is for the manual override, and when I place this hand crank in here, what it does is it overrides the control signal. It'll prevent the actuator from moving as long as the hand crank is in here. What you can also do is you can manually change the location or the position of the actuator, and you can move the valve manually. Again, you can't leave this in here if you're going to be in an area where you have high moisture, if you have water, you have rain, any precipitation. You need to take this out, place the cap back in, tighten it down snugly so that you make sure that the O-ring is touching the top of the actuator. All right, so now I want to talk about the wiring of the PR actuator. I'm going to take this cover off. It's held on by 4 Phillips head screws. And when I remove the cover, I want to point out a couple of interesting features about it. The first thing is we have a black rubber lanyard that is holding the cover to the PR actuator. This is useful if you're working up on a ladder or in a high area. You won't lose the cover if it falls down. What's important is when you're finished with the wiring, we want to make sure that you tuck that lanyard underneath and you're not pinching it in the cover. The very next thing is, I would like to show you there's a rubber gasket that runs under the cover on this lip. The same thing, when you're putting the cover back on, we want to make sure that we don't pinch that gasket, and we want to make sure that it makes a good seat so we maintain that NEMA 4X rating. The very next important part of this wiring area is what we're calling the wiring channel. And what that's made for is if I want to enter into the wiring area through this conduit connector hole that's over here, what I would have to do is I have to run my wiring through this channel, and I could then connect up to the power and the control signal. The reason that that's important is this wall here and this wall here, they're also in the cover, and when I put this cover on, this separation here, they're going to make connection, and if you run a wire over the top, you're going to pinch the wires, and in a worst case scenario, you're going to short the wiring out. So it's very important to use this chamber. The next thing is, we ask that you don't cut or break this separation here. If you need to wire the switches, you're going to have to take and wire through this conduit connector that is made just for the switch area. I want to take a look at this series of items over here. There's 2 conduit connectors. They're called PG11 connectors. I've got a brass knockout plug. I'll show you how to use that momentarily. And this comes with a couple of different size grommets based on or depending on the type of wire, the size of the wire that you're using. And I've got 3 O-rings. This connector here that comes with the actuator has to be used with the PR actuator, and you can't use a standard 3/4 inch or a 1/2 inch conduit connector to go right into the body of the actuator. The reason is the threads where the conduit threads into are what we call a PG11 thread. And so what that means is this male end of the fitting has a PG11 thread. On this end is a female side, and it has the 1/2 inch connection for a standard US connector. And what I want to show you how to do is hook up the wiring and the steps to take. The very first thing we need to do is take this O-ring that comes in the kit. I'm going to put it on the male threads. And when I go to tighten this into the body of the actuator, this is going to help maintain that NEMA 4X rating. The very next thing we do is I can take and unscrew this connector. It snaps off. And you can see there is one grommet in here. It's a gray one. And again, there's another gray one on the side and another one inside the other connector. This is designed to run just one cable through the conduit connector. The reason is we want this grommet to squeeze around the wiring, and it's going to help maintain that NEMA 4X. if I run 2 cables or more through this section here, I'm not going to be able to get a tight seal, and it won't be weather tight. With these other sizes, the green and the black, we've got some different size wiring that we can run through the conduit connector. We don't recommend that you use a screwdriver. We don't recommend that you use a drill to knock this out. We have seen cases where customers have wanted to use a 3/4 inch conduit connector, or they wanted to use a 1/2 inch. It won't thread into the body, so they take and drill the body out. And again, it won't maintain the NEMA 4X rating if you do that. Once you've taken and connected this into the body, I want to show you could take any standard. I mean, we don't recommend a particular brand over another, but this thread on this conduit connector is 1/2 inch male thread, and it'll screw right into the body here, like that. All right, let's take the brass knockout. I'm going to take a 22 millimeter wrench. You don't have to use a 22 millimeter. You could take and use an adjustable. You could use a pair of pliers. Once we make the hole in the actuator body with this, you can discard this plug. I'm going to take and thread this into the actuator body and just run it up till it's a little snug. And then I'm going to take my 22 millimeter wrench and I'm going to start turning this in, and it's going to get to a point that it is going to push the plastic out of the opening here. It's going to make a nice, neat, and clean hole. Okay, you can see as the brass knockout is pushing through, it has taken and broken out the little piece of plastic covering the hole. I can now back this out by hand, and you'll see you have a very nice, clean hole for the conduit connector. If you have any questions about this video, please call Belimo Technical Support at 800-543-9038, or you can go to www.belimo.us and find some more information on the actuator. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like the video.